Blood, your narrator, your radio gun reporting for the next hour. We're on the air Monday through Friday, 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time. More information about how to listen to the show, go to gcnlive.com or jackblood.com or deadlinelive.info or jackbloodforum.com or myspace/jackblood ... Joining us in the second hour is Richard Andrew Grove. He has just an amazing story of where he was on 9/11, who he was involved with, what he found himself in. In 1999, as his a great film, A Film to End All Wars, kind of dictates, he went out to New York to seek his fortune. He made his first million by 30 years old, and then he had an epiphany. He was nearly taken out that day at 9/11. Marsh & McLennan was the company I believe he worked for. I believe also a subsidiary of Kroll, a subsidiary of AIG. He was right in that infrastructure, has documents and evidence to show the involvement of AIG and their subsidiaries in 9/11, as well as this latest economic 9/11. His website is 8thestate.com. You can also say it 8thestate.com. It's a multimedia adventure. And Richard, the reason I love him so much, he's not only a great whistleblower and a great person and just does some excellent work, but he's also a fellow artist. Richard, thanks for joining us on the show today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Jack. Thanks for inviting me back.
I know you don't do a lot of interviews, and we're one of the few shows that you will appear on. You just have a mountain of evidence. If anyone out there has seen Who Killed John O'Neill, a lot of the stuff you see in that fictional account where they lay out the flow charts and the blueprint involving Hank Greenberg and AIG and really lay out and name names about what happened financially 9/11 as they begin to follow the money trail came from people like Richard Grove, a great, great film. People need to watch that again because it's just become very, very relevant with the so-called tipping over of AIG bailing out by the Fed, which we should remind you is not a government agency. It is a private company. This would be a good time to teach your friends and your family that particular issue as they're flooding the market with money and bailing out allegedly people like AIG. Richard, quickly tell my listeners kind of your story in just a couple of minutes. Kind of give us the bullet points and how you begin to open up this can of worms.
Sure. The short and sweet summary, if you will, would be I was working in a enterprise software company, which meant that my clients were the world's leading financial institutions. And before they can do anything action-wise in the world, they have to build software projects behind the scenes to facilitate the flow of data and information. So what I did was, I was involved in sales, and I was involved with clients like AIG and Marsh & McLennan and Lehman Brothers and Merrill Lynch and all these companies, Deutsche Bank. These were all clients of mine. And so before they go out and do anything, they come out with plans for software, and then we bid on how much the software is going to cost them, and then they actually build these projects. Well, on the behind the scenes, I was involved in AIG and Marsh & McLennan building some projects which were eventually used to defraud their clients of hundreds of billions of dollars. Now, I didn't understand the machinations at the time. The reason I found out is because I was being paid very large commission checks. And when you're counting on that money every month and you're getting paid a wrong amount, that was all I needed to kind of raise my head and say, hey, what's going on? I'm not being paid correctly. And after I asked these questions, the next day, the VP of sales flew in and fired me on the spot. And I had closed the largest deal in company history, and Marsh & McLennan and AIG were our largest client. And all this stuff was going on, but I didn't really realize it at the time. That was June of 2001. In August of 2001, my ex-employer came back to me and bribed me and offered me an extension in health care, which I needed because I had just gotten out of the hospital. And so I took the bribe, and I signed this contract, and the only binding thing was they don't want me to talk about what I did. And I thought, well, who cares? Nobody gets what we did there anyway. It doesn't matter. Well, a couple days later, 9/11 happened, and before 9/11 had happened, I thought to myself, people don't give you money for nothing. So I contacted some friends of mine at Marsh, and in a return phone call through a voicemail, I was directed to go to the World Trade Center on the morning of 9/11 to deliver the documents and evidence that I had to the 96th floor, and that's where the explosion occurred. So I was actually sitting in traffic in a Porsche Cabriolet with the top down, and, I witnessed the events. And it wasn't until about a month later that I caught on to some of the money laundering aspects and the coincidences that couldn't have been done by Muslim hijackers. And when you take these insider trades on American Airlines and Marsh & McLennan and they track back to the CIA, and they track back to Deutsche Bank, which was the first client we installed this special software, this internet portal where they could do all sorts of things behind the scenes as far as information transactions that they could never do before. So in a short story, that's kind of how I came to be involved.
Well, I want to underscore, because they destroyed a lot of evidence that day, both at the Pentagon and Building 7 and the World Trade Center towers. A lot of crucial evidence to show malfeasance, money laundering, et cetera, was all destroyed. And they tried to destroy you and your evidence by dictating you up. Again, keeping in mind they had prior knowledge that the towers would come down, and they wanted our guest, Richard Grove, to go up to the 96th floor to bring all of his evidence and to... I shouldn't laugh, but I mean, it's just amazing that they thought they could get away with this. And it was just fortuitous, a chance of luck. You got stuck in traffic, that you weren't up there in that tower and were killed that day along with your evidence.
Right, because Enron started, I think, September 6th, and a bunch of the Enron records were in World Trade Center 7 and in the World Trade Center. There's all sorts of things going on with that. And I think that, the person who, inadvertently or purposely directed me to go to the building that day in researching what he's done since, he's in a partnership with the Council on Foreign Relations member. So, when Silverstein's getting warnings from, possibly the Mossad or other CFR members who are in the know, and Marsh and AIG are run by a father and son team who are both in the Council on Foreign Relations, and the father, Hank, who runs AIG, was the chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations and the chairman of the Federal Reserve Bank. And then right after 9/11, Marsh and AIG got busted for their insurance scheme. So Spitzer goes in and investigates. And it goes really deep from there, but the summary is that Hank Greenberg had to leave AIG, and so that's what I think is going on right now. He's making a move through the Fed, using it as a proxy to retake over his company at a fraction of the cost.
You see, now that isn't something you're going to hear on the news, folks, every day. Can you get into, we got about 2 minutes left in this segment, and we're going to be talking about this, folks, for the entire hour with our guest, Richard Andrew Grove. Can you elaborate on that? So Hank Greenberg, Maurice Hank, they call him Hank Greenberg. It's not the baseball player, but, Well,
that's why he took it. He named himself Hank after the famous baseball player. His name's Maurice Greenberg. He had a history in the U.S. Signal Corps, which became the NSA. He has very close ties to the OSS and CIA. He's worked with Wild Bill Donovan back in the day before it was the CIA. One of the co-founders of the CIA, his son, is on the board of directors of AIG and Kroll Associates, and Kroll Associates did security at the World Trade Center on September 11th. And has an affiliation with John O'Neill and his death, and there's all sorts of things. But let me just back it up a second and just say that, it starts out, AIG started out with Cornelius V. Starr, who also worked with Wild Bill Donovan, and Cornelius V. Starr is related to Kenneth Starr, who put Bill Clinton on trial. So that whole misdirection about a blowjob while Kosovo and all these other, Milosevic, all these things are going on, we have to just understand that, they basically try their own people using their own people, so there's never any unknown risk in what's going to happen. It's all like theatrical.
Greenberg was deputy chairman of the New York Federal Reserve, 92 and 93, New York's Federal Reserve chairman from 94 to 95. And then he went to AIG, American International Group, which is much bigger than a insurance company. It is also been known as many other things, and it does a lot of its business overseas, which means if we're allegedly bailing out AIG, we're bailing them out to do business, not even here in our own shores where we can benefit from it. He became co-owner, Hank Greenberg, of the private spy agency Kroll Associates. But this is an interesting development, and so we'll come back. I want to talk more about who this is, how AIG was involved in 9/11, how that Hank Greenberg could be at the pinnacle of this financial 9/11, how, as Richard intimates, that potentially he could be doing a covert backdoor action to regain his company that he was forced to resign from after the SEC began investigating them after 9/11. Stay tuned. Richard Andrew Grove with us, 8thestate.com. Thank you for joining us. Deadline Live. That, of course, Jimi Hendrix. It is the anniversary of his death today, September 18, 2008. Richard Andrew Grove with us from 8thestate.com or 8thestate.com. You can just Google him and find that right away. A lot of good stuff there, including how to use hemp for energy, how to stop the war. He also supports the Iraqi vets against the war. Adam Kokesh on the program with us tomorrow, part of that group. And a lot of the fundraising he does goes to the IVAW as well as the Feel Good Foundation. So certainly, Richard, it can be said your heart is certainly in the right place, and you are a truth teller, my friend.
Well, thanks, Jack. That means a lot coming from you.
All right, let's pick up where we left off. You kind of dropped a bombshell, and that's why I wanted to have you on. And I'm reading things in a lot of the same ways you are. Hank Greenberg using the Fed to retake his company, AIG. Any elaboration, any evidence, any documentation you can throw behind that and let us know exactly why you think that would be appreciated. Go ahead.
That would have been good for me to print it out, right? I do have it, and I'm going to post it on the website along with this video in the next 24 hours. But what it posits is this. When Hank Greenberg got displaced out of his own AIG, he then became chairman. He fell back to be chairman of something called the Star Foundation and something called SICO, the Star Investment Company. And so when you go into what these entities do, it brings what AIG does into context, because AIG, for instance, at one time at least in the recent history, had more private airliners than any other corporation out there. So they had their own private fleet of airlines, like the largest private fleet outside of the military. And so the question is, what does AIG do? What is the nature of insurance? What is the nature of reinsurance? And as some people...
You mean protection money, right? But go ahead.
Right, sure. Protection money. There's where you bring in Kroll, because Kroll does kidnap and ransom protection and these sort of policies that are held by top CEOs and covered by AIG. They actually use Kroll as the operator, the actionary that goes in and rescues these executives who were held hostage for money and whatnot. So, you have that aspect of the insurance, and then when you get into the reinsurance, really, along with software, that is a prime vehicle and a plausible place where you can launder large amounts of money, because you're dealing with all this fluff, and there's not much solidness there. So it's a huge area. And so where you back up a step and you say, what was Marsh & McLennan? They're the world's largest insurance brokerage. They own reinsurance brokers. They own insurance companies. They're partnered father and son with AIG. And Hank's other son, Evan, ran ACE Insurance. So you've got his family in control of these three insurance companies. And then as a result of 9/11, what happens? Premiums go sky high, right? And at the same time, AIG and Marsh are caught cheating their customers out of hundreds of billions of dollars. And, when Spitzer investigates, that's a whole other story, because you have to understand where Elliot Spitzer came from. He was a rich kid whose dad was much like the Donald Trump of his time. Spitzer, financed his own campaign partially, but the other guy who helped Spitzer finance his campaign and get into politics was a guy named Michael Cherkasky. Now, Michael Cherkasky was the CEO of Kroll, and when Spitzer investigates Marsh and AIG, and Kroll is part of that group, AIG sells Kroll to Marsh, and Cherkasky, the guy who brought Spitzer into the politics game, becomes the CEO at Marsh, making it very hard for Spitzer to do an investigation. And at the same time, Spitzer's claiming to do an investigation into 9/11, but he never connects all the dots. Now, it's not my job to speculate why he doesn't connect the dots. It's just to notice the fact that you've got AIG and Blackstone involved with financing the World Trade Center, security of the World Trade Center. Marsh & McLennan is not only involved with their stock put options the week before 9/11, along with American Airlines, but Marsh gets hit in the attacks, and Marsh lost 320 people. And then the CEO of Marsh Risk is L. Paul Bremer, and L. Paul Bremer went over to Iraq and was overseeing,
the governor of Iraq, yeah.
Right. Hundreds of billions of dollars again.
And he's the one that, of course, broke up the military, and that, of course, precipitated in the sectarian violence. And then, of course, we can get into P2OG and some of these other operations. But how the plot thickens. Go ahead.
Well, so you have all these things, and they're kind of unnoticed both by the 9/11 community as well as the traditional news community. The traditional news community is running stories on Spitzer and why he can't crack AIG and Marsh and, what's going on there. And Spitzer's own account says the people at Marsh put on black hats, meaning that they weren't willing to share investigation information. They weren't willing to share information freely with the Attorney General. And Spitzer in his articles says, I can't figure out why they would do that. Well, I know why they would do that, because there was a